Did Galileo invent the telescope? Well, the correct answer is no. He was not the inventor of the telescope. He was, however, the first one to use the telescope and make scientific observations and publish them. Hi, I'm Pooja, aka the Wandering Stargazer, and let's look at some of the common mythbusters that people associate with Galileo and his discoveries. In July 1609, when Galileo was in Venice, that is the time when he first heard about this instrument which used to magnify and show objects from far away. During those times, it was also known as the Danish Perspective glass. This was nothing else but the first form of telescope that he heard of. He heard about this from his very good friend Paolo Sarpi, who was also a priest during that time and had worked on several experiments with Galileo before that. Once he heard about this, Galileo, who was already in his early 40s and late 30s at that point in time, was hungry to create more scientific contributions. You might be wondering who is the real inventor of this Danish Perspective glass or the early form of a telescope then? Well, the real person still remains unknown because there are three people who simultaneously seem to have invented the so-called telescope. One of the most popularly known name amongst them is of Hans Lippershey, who had filed a patent for the telescope in 1608. One of these people also went ahead and tried to sell a model of the telescope to the Venetian government. However, Paolo, who was a friend of Galileo, convinced the government authorities to allow Galileo to have a look at this telescope and replicate it for them rather than to buy it from a foreigner. After creating his model of the telescope, Galileo went ahead and demonstrated that live in front of everyone, which is what the famous picture depicts here. Well, why then would you wonder that we associate Galileo's name to the telescope so easily? It's because once Galileo saw the telescope, he saw the potential of doing science with it, and he realized that and he put that into motion much before any of his peers did at that point in time. He got his hands on the telescope and heard about the telescope in July 1609, and by the time it was end of October, he had already created or started writing his book Starry Messenger, in which he started writing about his findings that Galileo went ahead and discovered many things, and especially using the telescope, he discovered number one, the craters and mountains on the moon, number two, the moons of Jupiter, phases of Venus. Along with that, he also realized that the Milky Way band is not just a milky patch in the sky, but it is made up of individual multiple stars. And all of these things, because of all of these contributions of his, we very easily associate Galileo's name to the telescope because of his enormous contributions. Another common myth that people believe is that Galileo went blind towards the end of his life because of his solar observations. Well, this is actually incorrect. Yes, it is partially correct that Galileo did lose his eyesight towards the end of his life, but that was not because of his solar observations. Let's give the man some credit. I mean, he's been using the telescope since many years. By the time he went partially blind, he was around 72, 73 versus if we go back and trace the records as to when he started doing solar observations, that was years earlier. And any good eye doctor would be able to tell you that if he had to suffer any sort of eye damage, which would be like a central damage to the eyes because of his solar observations, he wouldn't have been able to see or make any of those other discoveries that he did later on in his life. Additionally, we also have some other evidence in form of letters where Galileo was corresponding to some of his friends, where he describes his observations, solar observations, and he particularly mentions how he observed the sun only sometimes during the sunset and sunrise when it is dimmer and it's safer comparatively. And secondly, he also specifically writes about the projection method of observing the sun, where he is not directly seeing it, but he's projecting the image from the telescope onto another a piece of paper or a cardboard and then making his observations, which is a very safe method to do. And specifically if he's written about these measures of observation, I think it's highly unlikely that he would be making such a big error as to seeing the sun directly from the telescope, right? Which is why it's a big myth that Galileo turned blind because of his solar observations. That being said, this is your friendly reminder: if you are planning to see the sun or the sunspots, make sure you have a good solar filter before you. 15th of February is Galileo's birthday, and we still remember him and his immense contributions to astronomy and science in general. I do hope you enjoyed these short stories from Galileo's work. Until next time, this is your host Pooja, or the Wandering Stargazer. See you next time. Take care. Bye bye. Clear skies.